8 times the sellers played the Pawn Stars. Hey everyone, and welcome back to The Screenie. We've spent a decade watching Pawn Stars make a fool of their customers and trick them into selling their valuable items for peanuts. But that wasn't always the case. The Harrisons have lost thousands of bucks along the way after making a couple of bad deals that led to a dead end. Let's take a look at 8 times the sellers played the Pawn Stars. Before we reveal some of the worst deals they've ever made, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Number 8. Willy Wonka Memorabilia.
It's like the Hope Diamond.
Talk about being speechless.
Yeah, that's like the Holy Grail.
Rick Harrison has repeatedly come under fire for scamming his customers and offering them less money than their items were worth. He has gained a reputation as a notorious negotiator who's constantly ripping people off and using their ignorance to turn a huge profit. Despite his best attempts to keep a cool head, Rick often let his emotions get the best of him and lost a lot of money along the way. This usually happens when he came face to face with sellers who could tell they have something he desperately wants and used his enthusiasm against him. One of his most memorable outbursts of excitement took place during the episode La La Land. Rick went to Los Angeles to meet a collector of Willy Wonka memorabilia, who owned a number of props from the original movie starring Gene Wilder. The Pawn Star flipped over while going through the items, and the seller made it clear he's not letting go of them unless Rick meets his asking price. He was impressed by each and every item in this collection, but couldn't imagine going home without the everlasting gobstopper this guy had. The only problem? He wanted $100,000 in return. Everyone expected Rick to walk away, but he eventually spent all that money on a tiny piece of fake candy. It turned out to be a pretty reckless move, since everlasting gobstoppers usually sell for $40,000, wasn't even in such great shape. Number 7. AUSTIN-HEALEY SPRITE.
Cash money, we can talk.
All right, $5,000.
Okay.
Now let's go do some paperwork, man.
Spending $5,000.
You must be either stupid or brave to buy a car that's not running. And that's exactly what Rick did during the episode Helmet Head. He met up with a guy who was trying to sell his vintage AUSTIN-HEALEY Sprite from 1964. But Rick wasn't ready to give him $10,000 in return. The Pawn Star knew he couldn't possibly sell it for that much, and they eventually settled on $5,000. The guy claims the car only needed a little tune-up, and Rick made the mistake of taking his word for it. He should have known something fishy was going on when the engine wouldn't start, but he decided to go with the flow. He asked restoration expert Wally Corhonen to help him get the car in a better shape, but he was up for an unpleasant surprise. It turned out this vintage model needed more than a little fix, and Rick was looking at $6,000 in expenses in order to help get it into working condition. He decided to try and sell it as it is, and described this purchase as one of the worst mistakes he's ever made. Rick felt it's sometimes best to walk away from a bad deal before it gets worse, and admitted he's dreading telling the old man he squandered away $5,000. Everyone was pissed off after hearing about his screw-up because it cost the shop a lot of money. Number 6. Shekel of TYRE. Despite their best attempts, pawn shop owners can't escape buying stolen goods every once in a while. It's just one of the risks of running this type of business, and Rick Harrison was left to deal with the consequences of his actions after each and every risky purchase. One of them was featured on the episode Shekel and Hide back in 2013. A guy walked into the store trying to sell a collectible Tyrian shekel. These coins gained notoriety as a likely mode of payments that funded a betrayal of biblical proportions. According to legend, Judas received 30 pieces of silver coins before he turned his back on Jesus. The seller tried to drive the price by telling Rick it's possible this coin once belonged to Judas, but he wasn't falling for that. The pawnshop owner was still interested because the coin was valuable due to its rarity, and eventually cashed out $1,600 in order to buy it. It later turned out the coin was stolen, and everyone was angry at Rick because they weren't impressed by this purchase in the first place. Luckily, he was allowed to keep the coin since the original owner already collected the insurance money. Rick still paid way too much to buy this item, and it definitely wasn't worth it since it gave him hell. Number 5. 1968 Ford Mustang GT. It's no secret the Harrisons are crazy about vintage cars, and they are practically incapable of saying no to a famous old model. No matter how much you might love something, it's still important to distinguish between a pile of gold and a pile of garbage. Rick Harrison failed to do so during the episode Bulletproof, where he spent a fortune on a car he couldn't possibly sell. The old Ford Mustang GT he checked out with Corey was so rusty that you couldn't even tell what color it was before. But that didn't stop Rick from describing it as the coolest car ever made. It was the same model that Steve McQueen drove in the cult classic Bullitt, and Rick just couldn't resist it despite its deplorable shape. Corey couldn't believe his dad was even considering buying this vehicle, but he eventually cashed out $12,500 for it. Rick was sure he could easily fix it up and sell it to one of the McQueen collectors, but it required too much work. And it wasn't even the actual car from Bullitt. Everyone felt he made a bad deal, especially since he didn't have a great track record buying and selling Steve McQueen memorabilia. Despite his immense love for this vintage Ford Mustang, even the old man described it as a piece of junk. Number 4. Edward Curtis Prince.
Lisa's a friend of mine. She manages a pawn shop down in Florida, and she's got some really cool stuff. Usually she drives a pretty hard bargain, and she's trying to sell.
Most of the customers who managed to give Rick Harrison a run for his money weren't just regular suckers who walked into his shop not knowing what they're selling. They needed to be experts in order to trick him into spending more money than their items were actually worth. And Rick really found his match in Lisa. She was also a pawn store owner who occasionally came into Rick's shop to sell some of the high-grade items she came across because Rick would have better luck finding a buyer. On one occasion, she came in with a set of prints of Native Americans taken by the renowned photographer Edward Curtis. Rick was impressed by these prints, and he could easily tell that they were real, but there was just one tiny problem. Some of the photos weren't in such great shape, and Harrison wasn't ready to meet Lisa's asking price of $15,000 because they were a little rough around the edges. They eventually settled on $10,500, and Rick felt it was a good deal at the time, but probably regretted it later on. This collection is currently available for purchase on the official Pawn Stars website with the asking price of $10,500. Long story short, they won't make any profit, even if they manage to sell it. Number 3. Disney Store Displays. Spending $30,000 on a set of paper mache items may seem like a crazy idea, but not if you're a sucker for Disney. Rick Harrison happens to be a big fan of classic cartoons, and that's why he describes the collection of vintage Disney store displays as one of the coolest items he's ever bought. The whole collection he came across that day was pretty impressive, and Rick desperately wanted a piece of it since he's a closet Disney freak. Harrison eventually cashed out $32,500 for 3 paper mache Mickey Mouse statues, but some of the viewers felt this was another reckless purchase. Rick came off as gullible and out of touch with reality because the seller obviously used him to promote his business. His appearance on Pawn Stars led to more publicity and gave him a chance to showcase some of his high-end collectibles Disney fanatics would go crazy for. Number 2. Macho Man costume.
I think this could be $9,000 or $10,000.
Beautiful.
How do you feel, man? He just dropped a flying elbow on you.
Corey Harrison is a big fan of wrestling, and he was pretty impressed after a guy walked into the store trying to sell a Macho Man costume that once belonged to Randy Savage. The hat, shirt, and pants were all signed by this famous wrestler, and the expert Steve Grad confirms that they were real. Corey eventually agrees to buy the set for $5,000, but the store is still struggling to sell it. Even Chum-Li felt it's too much money to spend on what he described as a Halloween costume. The Pawn Stars aren't the only ones this seller tricked. So was Macho Man's wife, who gave him this costume as a gift after he asked her to. The seller just happened to be their wedding photographer, and he was pretty close with the wrestling legend. After Savage passed away, his wife let him pick any of the items from the closet, and he went with this bright yellow costume. Some of the viewers felt getting rid of this item was pretty disrespectful because it felt like the seller was betraying Macho Man's legacy. Number 1. Auction Incident.
1917.
The 1917 I would consider selling, yeah.
I give you 50 cash for it.
I'd cry doing it, but I'd take 60.
Some of the items that are still up for sale could eventually turn a profit even if they don't sell at the world-famous gold and silver pawn shop. Finding a buyer at an auction is always a possibility, but Rick Harrison doesn't have a great track record with auctions. He experienced a world-class loss in 2015 when some of the shop's coolest finds sold for far less than he was hoping for. Rick lost a total of $100,000 that day and admitted he couldn't find a silver lining in the whole situation. He was dreading going back to the shop and sharing the news with the rest of his family because it was one of the biggest losses he ever faced. Rick took this big hit thanks to 2 major items: a Fender guitar that once belonged to Vic Flick and an Indian motorcycle with a sidecar from the 40s. Rick stated he lost $29,000 on the motorcycle, while the guitar lost him $35,000. The sellers who got rid of these items certainly struck a great deal, but the same can't be said about the poor old Rick. Thank you very much for watching today's video. Make sure to subscribe to our channel for more amazing content, and don't forget to check out one of the other 2 videos on your screen.